Only 2 House Democrats voted against the $2,000 stimulus checks. One of them was Oregon Congressman Kurt Schrader.
I rise today to speak against the Cash Act.
Today, we asked him to explain his vote to his voters.
I'd like to be Santa Claus.
One of the Oregon COVID hotspots is now one of the first to get the Pfizer vaccine. How did we get here? And the group battling back the forces of gentrification with a little home improvement. Here's the story. Yep, that was me 30 years ago. How you doing? I'm Pat Doris, holding down the fort for Dan Haggerty tonight while he enjoys some nice time off with his family. Don't worry, he'll be back tomorrow. This is my first time doing the show. Let's not mess it up. Good to be here, and rest assured the experience will be pretty much the same for you as it always is. We have our contact info that has not changed. It's now on your screen. For you tweeters, use the hashtag HeyDan to talk with us, or you can email the story at kgw.com. All right, ready? Let's get started. I want to start with a subject that's kind of fallen by the wayside since the holidays, and it's that red house in North Portland. For those who missed the saga, earlier this month, it started when a Black and Indigenous family who lived in a home on North Mississippi and Skidmore was evicted. They defaulted on their mortgage and the house was sold at foreclosure auction. But protesters then staged occupation at the property to keep them from being kicked out. That protest became pretty dang tense and resulted in some skirmishes with the police and even the media. Eventually, the family did reach an agreement with the city, and protesters took down the barricades that were set up across the street, although still not exactly clear if the issue with the Red House is resolved. And if you're wondering why we're bringing all this up, it's because the broader story definitely has not gone anywhere. It's the story of gentrification and people of color in the city being at a greater risk of living on the margins or being pushed out completely. And that brings us to our big story. There are so many factors to gentrification. One of them is when older people who bought their place decades earlier just can't keep up with the repairs. They might be living on Social Security and need a new roof, for example, because it's leaking. But that's a huge chunk of money. So you can see why they might feel pressure to sell, especially if an investor shows up offering 10 or maybe 20 times what they paid for the house. They move to another place with a good roof. The investor fixes the house, sells it for big money, and gentrification rolls right along. But now an organization in Portland called Take Ownership PDX is trying to stop that cycle. Christelle Kumwe explains how.
Betty Loving had family in mind when she bought her Northeast Portland home in 1992.
I was ready to have a granddaughter, and I wanted someplace where she could play, off the street.
The big backyard also meant she had plenty of space to garden.
It was so wonderful and exciting. I got out here every day after work.
But recently, Loving got sick and hasn't been able to do much around the house. Her roof started to leak and she had electrical issues. Loving couldn't afford the fixes and worried she might have to sell.
At least once a week, somebody would come and knock on the door or send me something in the mail. We want to buy your property, you don't have to do anything.
She wasn't ready to let go.
But I said, no, you can't have my house. I like my house. My granddaughter grew up here. And, I did this on my own. I just got to figure out how I can keep doing it.
That's when she found out about Taking Ownership PDX, a soon-to-be nonprofit aimed at protecting Portland's Black neighborhoods. The group renovates homes and takes away the pressure on owners to sell and slows gentrification. They fixed Loving's roof, took care of electrical problems, and even built her an outdoor shade structure.
I tell you, it's just a blessing.
Randall Wyatt, the executive director at Taking Ownership PDX, says Betty Loving's home is just one of many homes they've been able to revamp and renovate over the past few months. They first started in June.
Since we last spoke, we probably worked on about 6 houses. We're up to about 18 now. Work ranging from about big jobs like roof replacements.
73 families in need are on the wait list. That's a big number for this small but mighty team.
So typically it's just me and my project manager, Zach. We'll go out there and we'll take a look at the area and see what services we need, and then we'll just use the funding to purchase the services.
Services that are free to homeowners.
And that's the thing that shocked me, I said, well, okay, now how much is this going to cost me? And he said nothing.
Generous donations make it possible for Taking Ownership PDX to help people like Betty Loving.
2020 was so hard in so many ways. And then he came along. So just to give you hope, It really did.
Christelle Kumwe, KGW News.
I'll share that story next time somebody tells you that there's not good people in the world. There's some promising news on the COVID front. The case numbers and hospitalizations for COVID-19 have stabilized in the Portland metro area this month. Meanwhile, we learned about a new group of Oregonians expected to get the Pfizer vaccine: prison workers and eventually inmates. The Oregon Department of Corrections got 400 COVID vaccines yesterday. First in line will be medical staff, transportation workers, and staff members in direct contact with the virus. The DOC says this will also include a small number of inmates who are assigned to clean COVID-19 units inside the prison. We reached out and said, okay, how many inmates? They could not give us an exact number. Prisons have been hit hard by the virus. There's a lot of people packed together in close quarters. Social distancing is pretty tough. Of Oregon's 13,000 inmates, 21 have died since March. More than 2,200 inmates have tested positive, another 560 staff members as well. And it seems right as we are feeling good about the vaccine, we started hearing about a new strain of COVID-19 making its way around the globe. And we learned today it's in the U.S. Keely Chalmers talked with two experts about whether the vaccine we're using now is going to be effective to fight back.
So December was an amazing month. I think people really took seriously the calls to take precautions ahead of Thanksgiving.
Multnomah County's top doctor says although we're still seeing hundreds of new COVID cases every day across the Portland metro area, the overall case numbers and hospitalizations are stabilizing. Cases even slightly decreased over the last few weeks,
which is incredible when you look at the rest of the country.
But Dr. Jennifer Vines warns the risk is still high.
We are nervous to see what happens in January following both Christmas and New Year's.
And now confirmation that the highly infectious coronavirus variant has been discovered in Colorado.
Well, first of all, we know that coronavirus, like other viruses, mutate all the time.
Dr. Joe Sullivan is senior health advisor for Oregon Health Authority. He says this latest variant, discovered first in the United Kingdom and now in Colorado, is interesting in that it can spread much faster than the others.
The number of cases associated with this particular variant is really high. So probably 60% right now of all the cases in London and southern UK are related to this particular variant, which means that it suggests that it's spreading faster.
But Dr. Sullivan says most experts do not think this new mutation is going to impact the effectiveness of the COVID vaccine. That's because structurally the viruses are the same. The UK is using the Pfizer vaccine right now, so health experts there will be monitoring to see if people who get vaccinated get this variant. But they do not expect that will be the case. Dr. Sullivan says Oregon recently got funding that will allow experts here to do the same.
I think that that's still a possibility. I think the thing that people need to remember is there's no evidence that this variant is more dangerous in that it causes more severe disease. In fact, it may cause less severe disease. We don't know yet.
Dr. Sullivan points out because this new form of the virus spreads easier, it's even more important people get vaccinated when they're able to do so. In Portland, Keely Chalmers, KGW News.
Folks at the Oregon Veterans Home are getting their first round of vaccinations, and this was a long time coming. How did we get here? The home in Lebanon was the site of one of the first COVID outbreaks in the state. In March, when the reality of COVID-19 was settling in across America, 2 senior care residents tested positive. And this was before we fully understood the virus and had all the protocols in place. Caregivers started reusing masks, and state officials were making up the rules on the fly. As of today, there have been 21 cases in the home and 8 deaths. But progress is also happening quickly now. On Saturday, 90% of the residents of the Oregon Veterans Home have received the first dose of the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccination, along with 60% of the staff. Both medical frontline workers and residents of long-term care facilities have first dibs on the shot, but they all still need the second and final dose. So until then, the home will continue to follow strict protocols and regular testing. They're also working with the state to figure out visitation guidelines. Until then, the director of Oregon's Department of Veteran Affairs, Kelly Fitzpatrick, is grateful but realistic, saying hope is here, but the darkest days of this pandemic may yet lie ahead. And that's how we got here. Well, if you caught NBC Nightly News right before us, you probably saw the U.S. Senate blocked a bill to increase one-time COVID relief payments from $600 to $2,000. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says he wants to take a crack at a larger deal involving some of President Trump's other priorities. So there is still a chance that it could happen, but definitely not right away. Hypothetically, though, if it does happen, viewer Sandy Toms wants to know, are they going to issue another check to make up the $2,000? Short answer is, you betcha. The $600 one-time payments are already a done deal. So folks who make less than $75,000 or couples making less than $150,000 will definitely get those, possibly as early as tonight. And on the off chance that Congress approves raising the payment to $2,000, you'll get another payment for $1,400 and a grand total of $2,000 in the bank. Just don't spend that extra money yet. And while the U.S. Senate is a big question mark, the U.S. House was not last night. It passed its version of the bill to raise $2,000 for those payments. Again, this goes nowhere without the Senate's approval. But it does say something about our divided government, especially since 44 Republicans voted yes and 2 Democrats voted no. One of those Democrats being Oregon's Congressman Kurt Schrader.
This is an ineffective and poorly targeted approach to aiding Americans in distress. It is clearly a last-minute political maneuver by the president and extremists on both sides of the political spectrum who have been largely absent during months of very hard negotiations. They have chosen to tweet their opinions instead of coming to the table to get aid in the hands of Americans and small businesses that need it most.
Well, the congressman's never been short on words. That was him on the House floor last night defending his no vote and bucking his Democratic colleagues. We had a chance to talk to him one-on-one today to go into more detail and to explain his vote to his constituents in Oregon's 5th District.
We have really tried to target things to the variety of people and occupations and businesses that we have in this country. That's where we need to be putting our money. I'd like to be Santa Claus. I'd like to, have money just drop out of the sky for folks, but it doesn't happen that way. You guys know that. We're already spending money we don't have. The $4 trillion we spent this year on COVID relief from March till now, we don't have that money. We're putting it on your kid's credit card. Don't you think we should be very careful and thoughtful about any future relief so we minimize that impact on future generations, but make sure that we take care of people now? That's what it's all about, folks, and that's what Congressman Kurt Schrader did.
All right, always a little awkward when you refer to yourself in the third person, but we get it. When the story continues, it's that part of the year where we remember the year that was. 2 Oregonian photographers tell it what it was like to capture 2020 in film and the moment that everything changed.
Like, time just became suspended.
Welcome back to The Story. I'm Pat Doris in for Dan. Dan may be gone, but his name is still on our hashtag and our Twitter because he's going to be back. So if you have a question you want us to tackle or some feedback you think we need to hear, use the hashtag HeyDan to get our attention. You can also email us at thestory@kgw.com. Got that? Good. Here on The Story, we like to recommend work from other local outlets that we think are worth our time and your time in a segment called, well, Worth Your Time. And we're nearing the end of 2020, so we're seeing a lot of year in review lists like the one from the Oregonian, a collection of their best photos from 2020. And it is remarkable to see how things have changed from February to March when COVID-19 changed the way that we lived our lives. Our Maggie Vespa talked with 2 Oregonian photographers whose work makes up a good chunk of that story.
When you look at the headline photo, so to speak, it's one of Dave's, and it's that employee at Woodstock Spirits who's all masked up. And it's from mid-April. I mean, you think back to that time, we didn't really know a lot about what was happening with the virus. But then you kind of scroll down and you backtrack to January. And it's wild to look at what you all were covering at the time. I mean, this question is kind of to either of you, just off the top. Is it as insane for you to look back at what you were shooting and what we as journalists were covering pre-pandemic?
Yeah, it feels like it didn't happen this year. When you go back to January, it doesn't feel like that was 2020. It's hard to remember what happened in January. For me, it feels like long in the distance. I can remember the Jeremy Christian trial, which was in February, but that also just feels like that happened in a It couldn't possibly have been this year. It was too long ago.
The whole year, I would say, felt this sort of like time just became suspended. And it's like, what is it, March 59th, today? Or
right.
Just like a really, really, like our whole concept of time was just shattered and in pieces on the floor, basically. I mean, that was just, and I think it was like that for everyone. It was just sort of like an assault of news for all of us, really, not just here in Portland, but around the country. It was a big year for everyone, and it was a big year for journalism.
Yeah, how about that? Beth, by the way, one of my favorite photographers, and beautiful pictures there. If you want to check out the entire slideshow, it's up right now on OregonLive.com. And of course, we have a shameless plug of our own. Right now on KGW.com, you can check out our 2020 year in review coverage, including the top sports stories, biggest moments in pop culture, and all the huge names we lost. That's up right now at KGW.com. We are also looking back at how the story covered this crazy year, like when Kyle Leboshi discovered that wildfire victims, did you get this one? Wildfire victims in Lincoln County were facing big taxes to rebuild their own homes that burned down. It's one of my favorite stories of the year. Let's take a look back at that piece from October.
John Skelton didn't have time to say goodbye to a home full of memories. He and his wife barely escaped before the Echo Mountain fire burned everything.
My wife and I were in our 80s, and there's a whole life down the drain. No pictures left, no nothing.
All that remains of his Otis home near Lincoln City is a skeleton of steel. His prized flower pots broken, a model train set scorched, and 50 years of sheet music reduced to ashes.
We're starting now, and we're going to rebuild.
So John turned to an old friend, Douglas Bernhardt, to help rebuild.
Yep.
When they applied for a permit, Lincoln County warned they'd have to pay a new construction tax of nearly $2,000. The pair tried to explain this wasn't new construction. They were simply replacing a manufactured home.
The house was
building officials didn't budge.
Well, they're kicking you while you're down. Exactly what they're doing.
Neighbors like John Parrott complained this construction tax couldn't come at a worse time.
Everything's gone. The only thing left on my property was sheet metal.
More than 300 homes were lost in the Echo Mountain fire. The victims are trying to rebuild their lives, and insurance only covers so much.
I'm living in a trailer. It's going to be 33 degrees tonight. They need to come out here and help us, not be charging people.
The construction excise tax allows local school districts to charge for construction if they want. The tax money helps accommodate growth, so districts can pay for larger classrooms and improved buildings. Earlier this month, wildfire victims asked the Lincoln County School Board for a waiver, making them exempt from paying the construction tax.
It's not a new burden on the school district, so why should they have to collect that money?
Well, we're very compassionate for these people.
During an October 13th meeting, Lincoln County School Board members said their hands were tied because of how the law was written. Despite losing their homes to wildfire, the victims would have to pay.
This is out of our control.
District Superintendent Karen Gray declined an interview, but in an email to KGW she said, "There are no exceptions I am aware of. The law requires that we collect it at the board-approved rates." And this tax may not be limited to just folks who lost their homes in Lincoln County. Similar construction excise taxes were implemented around the state, including many areas affected by wildfire. A review of local tax records shows there are potentially hundreds of Oregonians who lost their homes in the Almeda fire, the Holiday Farm fire, and the Beachy Creek fire, who could be assessed similar construction excise taxes by their local school districts when rebuilding.
When I heard about this, Kyle, from you, I was thinking, this is so not the intent.
Former State Senator Ryan Deckert, who sponsored the legislation creating the construction excise tax in 2007, explained school districts have the leeway to provide waivers.
I'd just be really disappointed and surprised if they charged the wildfire victim that's trying to rebuild this fee, because it'd be relatively easy for them not to do it.
Other school districts provide waivers. For example, the Greater Albany School District doesn't charge a construction excise tax for a home replacement due to fire or flood.
It certainly can be done. Any district can waive it.
The North Santiam School District waived its construction taxes for wildfire victims with a simple vote explained board chair Mike Wagner.
It's just kind of a no-brainer, that somebody's had their home burned. They don't need to have an extra tax put on when they're rebuilding their home.
So Kyle stayed on the story and stayed on the school board because that's what local journalists do. And earlier this month, guess what? They voted to waive the construction tax for the fire victims. Well done, Kyle. Our investigative team did a lot of great work this year, and you saw many of their stories right here on the show. We have a special looking back at those stories. It's up on KGW's YouTube channel right now. And while you're there, check out our special episode of The Story called 2020. How'd we get here? That's a look back at some of the biggest moments of the year. It's up on YouTube, and it's also airing on old-fashioned TV this Thursday at 6 p.m. We're going to finish the story with a trip up the mountain. It's coming up right after this. We have one comment tonight from Roberta, who asked where she could donate to Taking Ownership PDX. Remember, that's the group that fixes up homes to help folks stay afloat in gentrifying neighborhoods. Yes, you can definitely donate. Their website is takingownershippdx.com. We'll have that link up on our website as well. Well, that's the end of the story, at least this edition. Remember to follow us on Twitter at @TheStoryKGW. Use the hashtag HeyDan or email the story at kgw.com. The news at 6:30 is coming up next, but first we're going to leave you in the very capable hands of photojournalist John Goodwin, who takes us up for a perfect day on Mount Hood at the Meadows. Good night, everyone.
This is a beautiful bluebird day on Mount Hood. I don't know that it gets much better with some new snow just a couple of days ago.
The parking lots are really crowded, but the lifts are not, which is awesome.
I mean, this is one of the safe activities we could do, right? So it's a huge break from sitting at your desk, staring at a computer all day. This is definitely the way to go.
It's kind of our one big escape.
I tell you what, riding the lift, seeing that beautiful mountain, just being inspired by it, and then seeing how many people are able to enjoy and enrich themselves. And that's why we're here. And we need to spread people out. Even when people are standing in a lift line, they're respecting each other, spreading out, wearing their masks, covering their noses.
I feel like there's more of a sense of community. I think people are just happy to be here and willing to work together to keep it safe, which is really cool.
I highly recommend coming out here with your family. If you don't know how to ski, take some easy runs, take some lessons here at Meadows, and then work your way up. And you can just have, no matter what skill level you are, you're going to have a great day.
Be patient, be flexible, be kind. And I have to say, I've never seen more kindness in our lift lines than this year.
It's a beautiful day. Feeling pretty fortunate.